Yeah, I'm Bryan Hanson. I'm research agronomist at Langdon. Talk about a study we conducted the past 3 years. This seeding date by cultivar influence on soybeans in the northeast part of the state. Before I start, Hans talked a little bit about this, but just go over a little bit about soybean maturities. We're really looking at two things here: how the soybeans respond to day length or increasing night length, and also heat units. So you can see in North Dakota, about the top quarter of the state, we're typically in the 00 group. And as we move to the other parts of the state, we're generally in the 0 group. And maybe way here in the southeast, we'll have some ones. And within those, we go from, it's divided into tenths. So we can go from 0.2 to 0.2 would be about 10 days difference, with each tenth representing about 1 day. And heat units, I'll touch on the next slide, but what I wanted to mention here is we obviously know that soybeans have been in the state, for a number of years now, and started essentially in the southeast, and acreages have grown as we go further north and further west, further in the years. And the Langdon region, especially along this Canadian border, where we have Towner, Rolette, and Cavalier County, is generally the coolest and the shortest growing season in the state. So the acreage has increased quite a bit since 2011, when those three counties went from 86,000 up to 417,000. So it's quite a bit of increase and a lot more interest in soybeans in those years. Just a little note on soybean growing degree days. They're the same as for corn. And as you can see in the state, we have quite a few more days in the southeast, and generally 2,000 in a lot of the state. But you get along in the northeast part of the state, the Red River Valley runs along the east here, and you get a lot fewer growing degree days here. We have Langdon at 1786 and Rolla. So we do have the shorter growing season that we have to contend with. So why is this research important? Well, it really started with a hailstorm back in June 9th in 2017. And of course, June 10th is the final day for crop insurance, get full insurance. And the RAMA came back, well, you have to replant, and that would bring us out to July 5th. And I was getting a lot of inquiries from the insurance people on, what's my feelings on this? And we didn't really have any hard data. And the RMA have since modified their requirements just to 10 days after final planting, if practical, but we still needed that hard data for this part of the state. Most of the seeding data has been done in the southeast or the central part of the state. And when we get this far north, we don't have a lot of leeway. If you're in the south and you plant a 0.3 or 4, you can always, if you run into a situation like we had, you can always maybe find an earlier maturing variety, or up here we generally plant the earliest maturing varieties to start with. So in all areas of the state, choosing the right combination of seeding date and cultivar, is one of the more important decisions that you as a producer would make. And as Hans mentioned, with fall frost, it's maybe a little more important than the spring frost. Here at Langdon, the last freezing date is September 29th, and that's 28 degrees. And for the spring, we want to get in, early to get advantage of the higher yields. But we also need to watch the soil temperatures. They should be 50 degrees or more with favorable conditions afterwards. If we plant into cool, wet soils, we're going to get low germination, probably increased diseases and poor stands. And as mentioned, if we can plant that full season cultivar, we're going to have a higher yield than typically a shorter season cultivar. So the methods we used, we just had 3 dates in 3 years, and we're generally looking at the back end here of the dates. So May 15th up in this region, get a little further south, maybe a hair earlier, but is a good day. It would be considered you're getting into crop pretty early. And we went out to June 19th to June 25th. I chose 3 cultivars from the same company, because there can be some subtle shifts in maturity if we choose varieties from across different companies. But I went 005. I was looking for the 0.8 when they delivered the seed. They didn't have it. They said, here's 0.9. I said, okay, we'll go with that. And 0.1. So I'm just going to talk with you a little about the yield and some of the agronomic traits here. So we had 3 seasons, and everybody knows when you start the year, you start out, what's a normal year? What's an average? Well, average is, a normal is the average of extremes. So every year is different. I think these 3 years, I probably hit a normal and 2 extremes. But 2018 was probably as normal as we got. And so we had temperatures are about normal, and the moisture as well. October didn't treat us well. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But typically, we're looking for planting about May 15th. So here, some of the agronomic things that we'll see is generally you might see a difference in plant height. It might decrease. You plant early, you get more vegetative growth, and when you get the right day length or increased night length, the flower is initiated. So you get shorter internodes as you plant later, and you can kind of see that in the pod height. You'll get some shorter pod height as you plant later. Days to mature, obviously, you're going to go have fewer days to mature as you plant later. And typically, 1,000 kernel weight and test weight are not that much affected by yield or planting date, and it depends very much on each of the years on these. And as Hans mentioned, oil is an important factor, and typically we see a decrease in oil as we go further out, seeding date, and protein could be flat, or we could see increases. So just looking at some of the maturity group, the cultivars we had, and I'm really more interested in the maturity group more so than cultivars, because obviously there's lots of cultivars to choose from, even within a certain maturity group. So a lot of these differences are more because of the variety and not so much of the seeding date. Most thing we'll look at is, days to mature obviously would increase as we get the later maturity. And protein and oil, again, would be, some of that would be a variety dependent. So I just have some pictures here, found kind of interesting. This is about September 10th in 2018, and you can see the May 15th date. It looks like we're about ready to harvest already. And here's the June 24th. There's some leaves hanging on here in the 0.1. And as we get to June 4th, quite a few leaves on the 0.1 maturity. Quite a few have dropped already in 0.5. And get to June 14th, most of it is green. There's some color changes on the 0.5. And then this particular year, we did have that killing frost on September 29th. So this is what it looked like on June 25th. And the inset is what the seed or the plots and the pod look like. And that was October 24th. October was not very kind to us, as I mentioned, because we had 4 to 5 inches of snow. We had cold temperatures. And you can see at that date, when we planted that late, seeds had not developed. They were sticking to the sides of the pod, and even the 0.5, and the pods were tough and leathery, and they would have been impossible to combine. But the yields that year typically would be something you maybe call somewhat normal. The early or later maturing varieties, the 0.9 and the 0.1 had the highest yields in the May 15th and the May 24th. June 14th, the 0 was a little higher. And we go to the June 14th, and the 0.5 early maturing had our highest yields. You can see with each date that we had decreasing yields on each maturity group, but did have the highest yield potential early on with the later maturing cultivars. June 19th was a year to remember, either a year to remember, or I should say a year to forget. We planted all 5 days, but we only harvested the first 2. So we had the snow event in October. The main thing on this particular graph I want to show you, or table, is the decrease in days to mature up to the June 3rd. Protein did decrease a fair amount as we went from May 14th to the June 3rd, and the protein, I should say, was quite stable. We did have a little bit of issue with the stand on the May 23rd date, and it did have an effect on the yield. So this was on October 10th or 11th, 12th. Kind of depressing for the research guys as well. We had about 20 inches of snow here and filled our trial up to the top, so that we have dates 3, 4, and 5. And actually, I did call this mature before The snow came when we harvested dates 1 and 2, and actually the day before the storm. But as the snow melted, it dragged everything to the ground, and I really didn't feel comfortable. First of all, days 3 and 4, or 4 and 5, we couldn't harvest; they didn't mature. But I didn't feel comfortable with the data from day 3. But this is the little limited data that we did have was 0.05 all the way to 0.1, had about the same yield the first date. And the second date, they were quite similar, except we had a stand issue, which decreased the yields there. 2020, actually, we got into the field pretty late, May 21st, because it was so wet from the previous fall. So it was about a week later than I wanted to get in. This year, really didn't have much effect on plant height whenever we planted. Days to mature, of course, decreased as we got further into the month. And not much difference with 1,000 kernel weight or test weight. And really for 2020, it was above normal temperatures. It was drier in May and June. We had good July rainfall, and then it turned quite dry in August and also September, which did affect the yields as well. This one thing I'd like to point out, we had some interactions and some more dramatic differences with protein and oil this year. There's an inverse relationship between oil and protein. If you have the higher oil, you're generally going to have lower protein. And a good example here, we had, you can see the differences in the oil between the varieties, but as we went to the June 19th date, they all were about the same. And it was the opposite with the protein, where we had lower proteins to start the year. As we went later in the season, planting date, we'd actually had higher proteins. And some years like this variety, it'll be more flat as you go across the seeding dates. So this couple more pictures. This was on June 8th and 9th. Of course, thing with this year, as Hans had mentioned, we did have that early season frost. So, and this is on June 10th, which is about the same as the 2018 pictures that we had, but you can see how much further we are actually behind this year, even though some of the temperatures were a little bit warmer. We had later planting dates on some of these. And you can see as we move along here, date 2, 01s are quite green, along with dates 3 and 4. You can see some of the frosted leaves we had there. And we moved to date 5, and this is on September 10th. It's all looking pretty green, and I'm wondering, thinking, we're probably not going to get any data out of this particular date this year. But September and October were very kind to us this year. We had above average temperatures. We had very little rainfall, which was good for harvest, not so good for soil recharge. And then we had low humidity days. So this is September 24th, and we actually harvested the first date, September 25th. We harvested dates 2 and 3 on October 2nd, and dates 4 and 5 on October 13th. You can see some of the differences in leaf and leaf drop in some of these pictures. And this was September 10th on the June 15th date, or the the September 10th date picture. You can see most leaves dropped on 0.05 and 0.9. So the yields we had this year, though, varied a little bit. We got into the field a little bit later, and the yields for all our maturity groups were about the same on May 21st. And then they dropped off quite dramatically. You can see in each date this year, actually, that 0.5 had the highest yield, and the 0.1 dropped off. So especially for this northeast part of the state, I think you get into the end of May, and you typically want to shoot for the latest maturing variety that you would typically go for. Up here, it's generally maybe the 0.1 on, you could go up to, if you're in the May 15th, May 20th. If you move beyond that, if you looked at this year and last year data, you may be looking at still in the 00 group, maybe a 0.1, but as you move into June, especially the first 2 seeding dates, you probably want to stick to that 00 maturity group. And this is just a combination of 2018 and 2020. It's just an average of the two. And so as I mentioned, for the northeast part of the state, anything before the 1st of June, you could probably go with a 00 and maybe a very early 01. But as we drop into June, even the first June 5th to June 10th or so, you need to be in a 00 group. And if you or need to, like this year, some of the farmers in our area didn't really start planting soybeans till the first part of June. So they were kind of later than they wanted to be anyway. But if you get way out to the June 22nd, up this far north, it's really dependent on that particular year, and generally not a good gamble to plant that late, obviously, if you have to. So that's all the information I had at this time.